Hello everyone, Anna here from Englishlikeanative.com. Today we're learning 30 or so advanced phrases to use when talking about environment. Okay, so first on our list is the words global warming. Global warming. Now, global warming refers to the increasing temperature of the world brought about, which means created by, brought about by gases such as carbon dioxide. So you might say global warming should be top priority for politicians around the world. The next phrase is air quality. So air quality refers to the cleanliness of the air that we breathe. Often, if you live in a big city or somewhere where there's lots of cars and traffic, then you might find that the air quality is quite poor there. Next, we might talk about an oil spill. This year, 2020, there's been quite a bad oil spill in Mauritius or off the coast of Mauritius. An oil spill refers to waste oil that is deposited into the seas after an accident at sea. So usually a boat crashing or running aground or capsizing or setting on fire, exploding, will cause an oil spill, which can obviously affect the water, the marine life, the coral, and then wash up onto the beaches and have devastating effects on the people who live there and rely on the ocean for work and for food. The next phrase is humanitarian aid. Humanitarian aid. So humanitarian aid is the act of showing support to people who are struggling to survive. So if there are a group of people who have experienced perhaps a terrible oil spill, which has wiped out their entire ecosystem, so there's no fish, there's no tourism, they can't make any money, they can't survive in terms of food, so they might need some humanitarian aid, which would be probably provided by another country. The next on the list is energy conservation. Energy conservation. This is about the careful management of energy resources to ensure that they last as long as possible. So at home, you might try to conserve energy by turning off the lights when you leave the room, shutting down your computer at the end of the day, perhaps making sure that items aren't left turned on when you don't need them. So, do you conserve energy? The next phrase is renewable energy. Renewable energy. Renewable energy is an energy that comes from a source that's not depleted. It doesn't go down when used. So renewable energy would be something like wind power or solar power. Do you have solar panels on your house or as part of your work? Do you use wind power in your country? Some people live very close to those windmills, the big turbines. Many people complain about them, but it's a source of renewable energy. Can you think of other types of renewable energy? If you can, please write it in the comments. Now, another phrase which we do use commonly in conversation is environmentally friendly. Environmentally friendly. And if something is environmentally friendly, then it's a product or a type of behavior that does not harm the environment, that perhaps does the opposite, maybe helps the environment. So for example, plastic packaging is not environmentally friendly, but if something is packaged in recyclable materials, things that break down very easily like cardboard perhaps, that would be more environmentally friendly. Or perhaps your product has been produced in a way that's friendly to the environment. Are you environmentally friendly? Next, we have the phrase carbon footprint. Carbon footprint. This refers to the amount of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere as a result of the activities of a person, a company, or a whole community. So a person who travels on a plane, very often perhaps takes a flight every week for work or pleasure, would have a high carbon footprint. And they probably want to work on bringing that down to be more environmentally friendly. Next on our list is exhaust fumes. This refers to the toxic gases that are given off when a vehicle is switched on. So this will be vehicles that are fueled by petrol or diesel. You turn them on and out of the exhaust pipe comes these horrible fumes that are toxic. So they are exhaust fumes. Next we have flash floods. Flash floods. These are floods that happen very quickly. Perhaps there's suddenly a storm and a heavy downpour of rain, and the drainage system can't cope, so everything floods. That would be a flash flood. We experienced a lot of flash flooding last year here in the UK. Next we have drought. Drought is a very odd spelling, so listen to the pronunciation. Ow, drought, drought. A drought is a prolonged period of very low rainfall, creating a water shortage. So it's the opposite of flooding. There's no water. Have you experienced flash flooding or a drought? Let me know in the comments section below. Now, if things are heading towards a drought, then they might dry up. To dry up. A phrasal verb means to become dry. So you could say the river has dried up, or the pond, if you have a pond in your back garden, my pond has dried up. The lake has dried up. The reservoir has dried up. Okay, next we have the word famine. Famine. Now a famine is when you have widespread and extremely low levels of food. Now this could be caused for any number of reasons. In many cases it's man-made, so usually war, any sort of conflict could create a famine. But if we have issues with weather that destroys crops or makes it hard for farmers to do their job, then that can also create a famine. Next we have fossil fuels. Fossil fuels. Whenever you hear a discussion about global warming, people often refer to fossil fuels. And this is energy resources like gas and oil that are produced deep in the ground over millions of years. They're dug up, so people are often drilling for fossil fuels. The next phrase is climate change. So you definitely would have heard this in the news, especially recently. This is quite a hot topic. Climate change talks about the change in worldwide weather patterns. I wish that people would take climate change very seriously because it has an impact on all of us. Next, we have the words to combat or tackle climate change. So obviously climate change is the issue, and we would often use the verb to combat or to tackle climate change. Next, we have toxic waste. Toxic waste. So waste, of course, is rubbish. But if it's toxic waste, then it's poisonous, a poisonous type of rubbish. This is often produced by industrial processes. So you don't want any toxic waste being pumped into the water system because that would make people very poorly. Next, we have pollution levels. Pollution levels. So this is the amount of toxic waste, either in the water, in the atmosphere, perhaps in the earth. So you want to make sure those pollution levels are not too high. Perhaps people who live in a city with poor air quality because of exhaust fumes might have high pollution levels. Next we have contamination. To contaminate something is to make something impure by polluting it. So you could contaminate the water. If you dumped your toxic waste into the drinking water, that water would become polluted, poisonous, contaminated. You could contaminate food by putting something unwanted in there. The next phrase is the phrase, the natural world. The natural world. You might hear this phrase when talking about the world of nature, how it should be naturally. So the jungle would be part of the natural world. The desert is part of the natural world. Unfortunately, out in the natural world, you'll find poaching. Poaching. Poaching is the activity of hunting and killing wild animals illegally. We often hear on the news over here about the poaching of elephants or rhinos, usually because of the value of their tusks. It's very sad. Okay, so to stop these kinds of things from happening, you might have a pressure group. A pressure group. A pressure group is a group of people who try to raise awareness of issues and try to affect the views and actions of people and organisations. Perhaps they'll hold protests, they might take around petitions to be signed and try their hardest to get these issues, like poaching, sorted out. Now, when talking about the natural world, you might hear about the loss of habitat. The loss of habitat. Now, this is the decline of areas of land where animals and plants would normally live. Where I live in the outskirts of London, we have a lot of foxes. So foxes, I've had foxes come in the house. They are regularly in my garden. They steal our shoes and chew our shoes up. They'll steal my son's toys if we don't put them away. And so foxes are a little bit of a problem because there's so many of them, and they open up the rubbish bins and spread rubbish everywhere. They make a lot of noise at night time, screaming and howling. But the reason we have a problem with foxes in the city is because they have lost their habitat, their natural place where they would normally live, and so now they have to live in the city because they have nowhere else to go. Next, we have man-made disaster. A man-made disaster is quite self-explanatory. It's widespread damage or loss of life brought about by the actions of humans. So something that man has done has created a disaster, like a big explosion. Obviously, opposite to that, you would have a natural disaster. So something that man didn't cause, such as an earthquake, a flood, or a hurricane, which again causes widespread damage or loss of life. Next, you might hear the phrase natural environment. This is just a place where animals and plants would normally be found in nature, very similar to the natural world. So foxes are not really now in their natural environment. They live in a new type of environment. Next, we have the words to become extinct. Extinct. And a type of animal will become extinct if it no longer exists. So if that type of animal dies away and they're not breeding and there's no more of them, then unfortunately that becomes extinct. And that's very sad. There's lots of species of animal that are becoming extinct these days because of man-made issues, loss of habitat, climate change. It's all having an effect on the natural world. Now, when talking about animals, we might talk about animals that are under threat. They are under threat. And this means they're in danger of becoming extinct. There is another word that we use here, which I'll come on to in a moment. Now, if they do become extinct, then you could use the phrase to die out. So you might say the dodo died out many years ago. They became extinct in, I'm not sure what year they became extinct, but they died out. Now, as I said before, if an animal is on the way to becoming extinct, if they are under threat, then you could say that they are endangered or an endangered species. This means a category of animal or plant that's in danger of becoming extinct. Okay, next we have future generations. Often during these climate change debates, we talk about how future generations will view us now and view our actions and decisions around climate change, because it's the future generations who will be living with the results of our actions. Now, future generations refers to people who live after us, so our children's children. Next, we have the phrase sustainably sourced. Sustainably sourced. You might see this in advertising for certain products. It means something where a supply of that product can be constantly maintained. So by making that product, you're not depleting the natural world. You know, perhaps if you were making coconut oil and selling it so fast, you're just chopping down all the coconut trees and not planting any more coconut trees, and those coconut trees are in danger of becoming an extinct species of tree, then that's not sustainable. So often with things like that, they have to make sure there's a program running where what they take is then replaced. So they might plant more or only take so many, limit the supply. So that could then be advertised as sustainably sourced. If you're going to be environmentally friendly, you want to make sure you're buying sustainably sourced products. A way to protect animals and plants might be through the work of wildlife conservation. So wildlife conservation is to protect animals and plants and their habitat. Okay, so it feels a little bit heavy, this lesson, because we're talking about things that obviously all of us are experiencing in some way. These are big issues, but I do hope that you found today helpful. If any of these phrases are new, then I recommend that you write them within a sentence down in the comments section below. I will see you in another lesson. Take care. Bye.